Hi, my name's Dr. Kirstin Ferguson, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about my latest book, Blind Spotting: How to See What Others Miss. Now, the idea of blind spotting is meant to be this practical way we can overcome blind spots. Now, we all know what those are. It's this real gap between what we think we know and what is really there. Now, we all have them, and if anyone listening thinks they don't have any blind spots, can I suggest to you that is blind spot number one. Now, the reason I wanted to write this book is because the world we're in is rapidly changing. Everything we thought we once knew is no longer relevant. I can remember going to university 30 years ago, working in my first few jobs and thinking that everything I was learning was like a pile of encyclopedias I'd be able to take with me to every next experience and every next role. But of course now, most of what I learnt then is no longer relevant. Much of what I learnt a year ago, 6 months ago, last week is no longer relevant. The world is changing so quickly, so rapidly, whether through technology or bigger issues that are happening in the world around us at an economic and a political level, that everything we thought we knew is no longer the case. And so I truly believe that the most impactful leaders are those who can adapt to these new realities. They can learn, but then importantly, they can unlearn and pivot. They can understand that what they might have relied on up until this point is no longer something that they can rely on going forward. Now, in blind spotting, I talk about two kinds of people, and we are each of these at various different points in time. You'll never be someone who's always going to be thinking one way and never another. We all vary. Now, the first is a seeker, and we recognize those people. They're the ones who freely admit what they don't know. They use questions in a way to learn. They're always asking open questions, trying to be curious and find out why it is you might think the way you do. They might be willing to rethink their ideas when they get new information. They realize, I didn't know everything about that topic and I need to rethink what I thought I knew. There are also people who are comfortable with ambiguity. They're comfortable not knowing. So these are seekers. But we can all also be knowers. Now, knowers are those people who believe they've already got the answer. They don't need to listen to a different point of view. They're unaware of the biases that they might bring to any particular conversation or decision that they're making. And they don't use questions to learn, but they use questions to win. Now, those kinds of leaders need to be definitive in their answers. They don't like ambiguity. They don't like not knowing what's going to happen. They need to know precisely. Now, as I said, we can all vary between being seekers and knowers at different points in time, especially when we're stressed or under pressure or in a crisis. Knowing can feel very comforting. It can feel like something we can clasp onto, when really it's in those most uncertain periods that we need to be seeking to find the answers we might not already know. Now, the challenge for us as experts, and everyone listening is an expert in something, whatever it is you do. Many of us would have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where those people with a small amount of information tend to overestimate how much they know. Well, the challenge for experts, and something called the curse of expertise, is while we're really good at knowing when we're right, we are terrible at knowing when we should doubt, when we should be aware that we might be wrong. And that is why this idea of blind spotting is so important. Because if we are always thinking we're right, in a world that is constantly changing, we are bound to find ourselves wrong. So what I wanted to do was come up with a really practical way we can try and deal with the uncertain world that we're in. It's all very well knowing we've got blind spots. We're all aware of that. But I wanted blind spotting to be this active way of actually addressing those blind spots. And to do this, I came up with this idea of 3 different mindsets. Now, all 3 of them are important, but they have their most power when they're used together. And I like to think of them a bit like a flashlight or a torch, where it's like a power setting. You can use the first one and you get a bit of power, the second a bit more, but it's when you're using all 3 of these mindsets that we're going to get the full power to see what we would otherwise miss. So the first of these mindsets is to be honest. And this is the idea based on intellectual humility, that we accept our intellectual limits. We know we don't know everything. If you think of knowledge on a spectrum of, I think I know everything at one end and I think I know nothing about a topic at another end, neither of those are helpful. Blind spotting is the sweet spot in the middle, where we accept we don't know everything and we're okay with that because we're confident we can go out and find the answer. The second practice of being honest with ourselves is disentangling our ego. And this is one of the hardest things to do. But basically it means if you tie up in your sense of self who it is you are and what you do around how much you know, and I realize that's a long way of saying basically if I define myself by the job I do rather than being able to constantly learn, it means that I find it much harder to admit what I don't know because it's really attacking our sense of self. So if we can disentangle our ego, that makes that much more helpful. And third, in part of being honest, is really hunting for our biases. So it's acknowledging that we've all got thinking biases, the baggage that we bring with us to making decisions. If we acknowledge that that is there and we look for those thinking biases, we're much more likely to be able to say the 4 most important words for me of this mindset, which is I don't know yet. Being able to say I don't know yet is the most powerful honesty mindset we can have, because what you're saying to yourself, if not to others, is that I'm aware I don't know everything, but I'm eager to learn. The yet is really that crucial part, because you're saying I don't know now, but I'm certainly going to find out. Now, as leaders, being able to say those words actually builds trust. It builds confidence in people that you're being honest with them, because we can tell when people don't know something, but we tend to have a blind spot that we think others can't see that in us. All right, so that's the first mindset, to be honest. The second is to be curious. Now, again, there's a few practices that can make this easier. The first is we need to be sure we're always searching for the truth. Now, it blows my mind that we have arguments now about truth. What's the truth? Post-truth, all sorts of different truths, my truth, your truth. There is an objective truth, and it's that truth that we need to always be looking for. Now, we need to pursue different perspectives, and that isn't just a matter of looking for different ethnicities, different ages, different genders who might have a perspective on something. To me, this is, in this context, all about looking for different ways of thinking about a particular idea, finding people who disagree with you and trying to understand what is it you see that I have missed. It doesn't mean you need to take on that perspective, but it does mean you're starting to think about the idea that we have limits to how much we know, and perhaps we can learn from others. And finally, it's this idea of questioning for insight. It's using questions in a way not as knowers do, which is to win, but as seekers do, which is to gain insight. It's using really open questions to genuinely be curious about why it is someone might believe whatever it is they do, and how that may be something that you can learn from. Finally, the third mindset is to be flexible. Now, what this means is that you're able to read the room. You can see what kind of knowledge you need to be thinking about to even expand your point of view. You're able to embrace ambiguity. You understand that the world isn't fixed. Things are changing all the time, and we need to get comfortable with that. And finally, you can keep your mind open. Now, blind spotting isn't about flip-flopping and not having any firm views or, sticking to a firm view that you can't change. Again, it's that sweet spot in the middle. It's understanding that I might have a fixed view, but with extra information, perhaps I might need to adjust that view altogether. So they're the 3 mindsets of blind spotting, and the book goes through them in a lot more detail and gives really practical ways that you can use these mindsets and practices in your work. And it's not just for work. This is in those difficult conversations you might be having with a family member about a contentious political topic, or it might be just generally in how we have relationships with each other and with our children, and when we're parenting and with our colleagues. So blind spotting is something that can apply everywhere. Now, if you're interested, you can visit blindspotting.com.au and test for free your own blind spotting abilities, and you'll get a free self-assessment that'll show you how that can be used in your day-to-day life. Now, when you get to the last third of the book, you're going to find some really practical ways that you can start to live these blind spotting practices and mindsets in your life. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope you enjoy reading Blind Spotting.